Oh, hey, I'm so glad you're here. Welcome to the Efficiency Bitch podcast. I'm your host, Melissa Leone. This podcast is dedicated to all the women out there who are aspiring to have a career while raising a family. And bitch? Well, that's more than a name and even an attitude. We use it as an acronym. It's for bank, inbox, time, connection, and harmony. Each episode is labeled according to the correct topic so that you can efficiently find the topic that you're looking for. I'm here to tell you, you can have your cake and eat it too. The trick is finding efficient ways to get through the have-tos so that you can make room for your best life. I can show you how. Let's get started. Hey, welcome to the Efficiency Bitch podcast. I'm your host, Melissa Leone. If this is your first time here, welcome to the Beehive. I'm so glad you're here. If you've been around a while, welcome back. I think you're going to really enjoy today's episode. So today is going to be kind of a combo of connection and harmony. For me, balance is not a word that exists in my home. I believe in harmony. I want all things to be in agreement. But I also really strive to make sure my communication and my connection with the humans that live in my home is as clear and appropriate as possible. And so my guest today is going to talk a little bit about Enneagram. So I know very little about it, so I'm excited for her to tell you about it and how Enneagram can really impact the way you manage clutter in your household. So I'm really pleased to introduce you to my friend, Laurie Palau. Hi, Laurie.
Hello. And I love how you call it the Beehive. I just think that's so cute. I love that.
Thank you. You know, I had a strange relationship with the B word, both as a woman, but then also like Meta hated that word when I first started.
I'm sure.
They allow it now, but when I first started this in 2020, there was a lot of political stuff going on, right? And so the hate speech was really heavily filtered in those times. So B kind of took on its own persona, cover of my book, all the things. So anyway, Laurie, tell us a little bit about you, where you come from, how you do life.
Yeah. Okay. So Cliff Notes version, Laurie Palau. I am also a podcast person. I have a podcast called Disorganized Life. My business started when I was rolling up my sleeves in homes, helping other people, primarily women, but not only women, just busy people navigate clutter and organization. Wasn't working with hoarders, wasn't working with necessarily people that were downsizing over years. It was just more like life strategies. How do I get it all together? The physical stuff, as well as the calendar clutter and navigating time management and productivity and all of that stuff. And I started that business out of my own experiences as a mom with two little kids at the time who are now grown-ish. They're 19 and 22. So I've kind of navigated through the different seasons of life and motherhood while running a business. So I've also worn a bunch of different hats. And I've always been fascinated with the why behind clutter. Like clutter is really just the symptom. It's the byproduct. Mm-hmm. What's behind it? What's driving that clutter? And so I always say I was like a fake psychologist, but I've always did a lot of reading about kind of motivation and mindset and all of those things and why some people are naturally kind of, as I air quote, born with the organized gene, and other people are what I call like clutter blind. Like they can just walk by and not bother them, and other people it stresses them out. Yeah. And so I stumbled across a framework in about 2017 called the Enneagram. It's not a new framework. It's actually got ancient roots, but it was new to me. And it gained some popularity back around that time. And basically Enneagram stands for 9 types. Right? It's like think Greek or Latin for 9 types. And it talks about 9 different core personality typologies. And your type is dictated by your internal motivation, your unconscious motivation. So the why you do what you do. And because my work had always been talking about the why behind your clutter, I was like, oh, this might be fascinating. So I just started doing a little bit of research, and that led me down like a 5+ year rabbit hole of really peeling back the layers of the Enneagram, way more than most, and I hate using the word normal people would do, but I really started trying to find connection points. And so a lot of my work the past couple of years has really been trying to look at how our personality lends itself to certain habits and behaviors based on, who we are internally.
Fascinating. I mean, your comment about some people have to have clutter out of the way in order to think. And I am absolutely one of those people. If there is dishes in the sink or laundry to be folded or shoes out of line, it makes me really uncomfortable, where the rest of my household seems to be completely clutter blind, to use your phrase. And it really can create some tension within our household. And you and I were sitting together at Podcast Movement a couple months ago, and I was asking you about a book that you're writing. And we had a quick conversation, which is really what spurred me wanting to have this in-depth conversation here. And it was around understanding how your natural traits, your natural Enneagram, really impact the way that you behave around clutter. And most importantly, how you're communicating and connecting with those in your household so that you can achieve this harmonious state that I so desperately want all the time. Because I don't like to be stressed out, and I certainly don't want to put stress on them either, right? If forcing my children or my husband to constantly clean up stuff and that puts stress on them, I don't want to do that either. So I'm so interested in some of the work that you've done in that area. It's really exciting.
No, I appreciate it. Yeah. And obviously I love talking about this topic. And I actually remember that conversation vividly. So before we get further, I just want to, because I'm sure some people, especially if they're not familiar with the Enneagram, they're like, the natural question is probably like, how do I find out what my Enneagram type is? Right.
Yep.
So I'm going to just give you my quick little sound bite on that. There's a ton of different online assessments that you can take. I will take them loosely. I will give you a link. Again, I'm not paid by these people. Truity, Truity, and I'll send you a link if you want. They do a free assessment. Any type of online assessment, you get what you pay for, people. And this isn't a knock on Truity, but you're answering questions in the moment, how you feel. It is not truly always indicative to really what your Enneagram type is. So I would use that very loosely. What I tell people is if you really want to learn about your Enneagram type, you can read just the summaries of each of the different types. Just reading about them will oftentimes say, well, that's definitely not me. That's definitely not me. And maybe one jumps out at you, or maybe there's like two or three that you're like, I feel like I'm a little bit of this. And the reason that you would probably feel that way is because there's a little bit of each Enneagram type in all of us, but everybody has one core dominant type that you're like, well, some people argue that you're born with it. Some people say it's developed, but that doesn't change because it's the why you do what you do stays true throughout your whole life. But we all have touch points to all these other types. And whether you're using the word language, the Enneagram framework, it comes down to communication and using that language to paint that picture for other people. And what I loved about what we were talking about was that we all see the world through different lenses. And specifically what the Enneagram talks about is that there are 9 different lenses that we all see the world. And we assume that everyone sees the world the way we do. Mm-hmm. And we can't imagine, like, when I walk home and I see that there are dishes in the sink and it's stressing me out, how can that not stress you out? How can you just walk by that? And legitimately, somebody else might be like, that is just not even on my radar. And so when you start talking about the dishes being the problem, that's where the disconnect comes in. But it's really about how clutter makes you feel. Mm-hmm. And it's talking about when I come home and using that language. So like the work that I'm doing really is, yes, it's about the Enneagram, but it's more about what I call the language of clutter, is how does this make me feel? When I come home from work and I see dishes in the sink, it produces anxiety. It makes me feel stressed. It just adds whatever you're feeling, right? Or when I come home and I see that stuff is put away, that makes me feel valued. That makes me feel calm. That makes me feel whatever. And I think when we focus in on the thing, the dishes, the toys, the whatever, it really isn't getting to the root of what does that really even mean? Because at the end of the day, it's not about the Legos. It's about the fact that you want to be able to walk in and read your kid a bedtime story and not be tripping over toys.
Mm-hmm. And not want to sit down and clean. I just want to walk into your room and read you a story. Because if I see stuff, I'm going to want to clean it. I'm going to want to put it away and get rid of it. My husband, so about a year ago, I did a stem cell transplant. I was the donor to a man with leukemia who I've never met. It was just kind of a random thing. And my husband teases me that that man is probably cleaning closets somewhere because he has my stem cells in his body now. I am just built that way. It's organizing and decluttering calms me down. If I'm overstressed, you will find me cleaning out a closet. It's that nesting that happens even when I'm not pregnant. It's absolutely just part of who I am. And you're right. The emotional piece is so strong. So for example, every single time my three children get out of my car, I say to them, get all your stuff, all your shoes, all your toys, all your trash, all your crap, right?
Mm-hmm.
I have a 12-year-old and it's like the first time she's ever heard it every time I say it. I'm like, child, you've been in this car 3 or 4 times a day your entire life. And I have said it every time, but it makes me feel unheard. It makes me feel disrespected. And I don't think she hears it. I don't think she remembers it.
Well, it's interesting that you say that. So we'll just use this as as a guinea pig, for this People's Exhibit A. Sometimes, and every parent I think has felt this, that's present company included, that you're like, oh my gosh, I'm like spitting in the wind. I keep saying the same thing over and over. Like, this is crazy. This is literally the definition of insanity.
Mm-hmm.
And at some point, maybe it's reframing the wording or the language that you're using to make it resonate with her. Now, yes, there's something to be said about kids just developmentally are scatterbrained and not necessarily there. So of course, we're going to take that.
Sure.
But I know for me, I have throughout my children's developmental years, those early developmental years, really reframed how I phrased things. And I could say something, the exact same thing, but a different way, and actually get a different response. So maybe it is whatever she has a tendency to forget, or maybe she forget something different, figuring out what that is and framing it in a different way. And I know for me, I'm a big, also consequences person. So if my kids, I was a tough love mom. So if my kids were I'd be like, pack up your stuff. Don't forget your homework. Make sure you have all that packed. And if they forget it, they're like, can you drop off my thing at school? I'd be like, no, sorry, I can't.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of people would I'm running back to school. And that also adds a whole other dynamic to your own stress level, because then that's adding more to your plate. So again, figuring out, and this is going to be subjective to the child, the age, the situation, but figuring out if I keep saying the same thing and they're still doing it, maybe it's less about them and more about maybe I'm not saying this in a way that it's resonating with them.
Yeah, I agree completely. When I did my project management certification, one of the only things, quite frankly, that stood out to me was that communication is a two-way thing. And there was literally arrows pointing at each other, and you can send it, but if the other person doesn't receive it in the way that you meant it, it didn't happen. It's just didn't occur. And you can have all the intention in the world, but if the other person didn't catch it the way that you meant for it to happen, it was distorted, right? So I love that. I think taking responsibility for maybe the way that I'm saying things to her about getting your things. Maybe I need to name the things. I always say, get your stuff.
No. And that's right there is being very specific. And this is one of the biggest things, especially when it comes to kids. Again, my kids were breeding ground guinea pigs for every single work that I've done that has to do with this. So this is tested, tried, true, and tested. I learned when I would say, go clean your room, that's such a broad spectrum. That could mean shove it under the bed. That could mean shove it in a corner. That could mean shove it in a closet, whatever. When I say, I want you to put all of your, whatever the thing that they're playing with in their room. I want you to put your books on the bookshelf. I want you to put your American Girl stuff in the bin. I want you to put the Legos back, whatever that is, being very specific. It is really a key thing. And this goes for partners and spouses too. When we say, I need help, especially as women, we're like, I need help. Yeah. And to what help means to one person might mean something else interpreted to somebody else. So we expect people to be mind readers sometimes because we feel like a lot of times we're like, well, I can figure out what everybody else needs. Why can't you figure out what I need?
Yeah.
Let it go. Let it go and be very specific. Dumb it down is what I say. Just dumb it down. This is what I need you to do. I need you to go outside and water. I don't want you to assume that like, oh, we haven't watered the flowers outside, so they need to get. No, I need you to go outside and water the flowers. And if I can add another thing to that is the timeline, because again, and I would suspect you're the same, is when I ask someone to do something, chances are I want them to do it like now. Not like 5 hours from now. Like if I'm like, can you unload the dishwasher? I want you to unload it now, not in 4 hours. And so for me, being very specific, but when I'm just like, I want you to unload the dishwasher to my kid, they might be like, sure. And I'll get to it on their timeline. And they don't see anything wrong with that. When I'm like, listen, I really need you to unload the dishwasher. I'd really like you to unload the dishwasher right now so that I can take all these breakfast dishes and put them in the sink or put them back in. That's being specific. And so I think a lot of disconnect comes from the ambiguous language that we use.
I love that. We have a family email address, right? It's for the 5 of us, but really it's for me and my husband to communicate on the things that the children have to do or the household needs to do. And we use Google Calendar so I can add tasks and reminders. And I say to him, if it has a date on it, it needs to be done on that date. If it's just in the general task list, you can get to it when you feel like it. But it is amazing how giving specific timelines, and it kind of goes back to your comment about we all assume that the lens that we see through is normal, right? I read a book once called, oh my gosh, it just fell right out of my head. Chris Voss wrote it. Shit,
let's see.
It was just in my head.
Hate when that happens. I'll look up Chris Voss. I'll look it up. Well, keep talking.
Never split the difference. Never split the difference. I knew it would come back to me.
Okay.
Never split the difference. He's a former FBI negotiator for hostages. And so he talks about the way you communicate with people. And he said something called, we all have the I am normal paradox. We all believe that everything we think, everything we've experienced, everything we see is normal. And so how could we possibly communicate with the other people in our house, let alone the world, when we assume that they're seeing things through the same way? It's so
and that's the beauty. And that's the beauty of the Enneagram, is because it points out, first of all, your own blind spots. So it shows you the not good look side of yourself, right? And usually when people are like, how do I figure out my Enneagram type? When you read something that gets a little cringeworthy and you're like, oh, wait, that's me. That's a strong indication that that could be you. But what I find that it's given for me, both personally and then also professionally, is an understanding and an insight to the way other people see the world and go, oh, wow. And it doesn't give an excuse, it gives context, right? And so there are certain people that might be more prone because they're more emotionally driven versus more intellectually driven. You know, there's 3 main kind of centers that we talk about that all of us have. And in Enneagram language, they call them the 3 centers of intelligence, which are thinking, feeling, and doing. And we all have them in our lives, whether you know the Enneagram or not. And there are some people that are dominant in one center over another. And so that in and of itself, especially when you tie it back to clutter, is a huge indicator. It's not a perfect recipe, but it does give an indication of like, if you're somebody who is very feeling dominant, it would make sense that you might struggle with more emotional clutter. You might have more sentimental attachments to somebody that is more analytical or that's just more intuitive driven. And somebody that is, in the, they call it the gut center, that's a doer by nature. It makes sense and understandable that I might struggle with calendar clutter because I'm always doing. And that can be my downfall, even though I might not struggle with the emotional, sentimental side of things. We all have our areas where we're strong and other areas where we struggle. So I think it just provides you context.
Yeah, that's so powerful. Your book that you wrote, Hot Mess, talks a lot about those types of clutter. And you just hit on a couple of them. Can you give us like a quick definition of those? Just
absolutely. No, for sure. So in Hot Mess, I talk about 3 main types, and they are physical clutter, which is obviously the stuff that you see. And it usually comes from volume. Like are a shopper or we have more stuff than space.
Mm-hmm.
Or physical clutter can also just attribute because we don't have the right systems in place. So maybe you don't have a ton of stuff, but it's disorganized because you don't have the right tools to make it easy to retrieve.
Mm-hmm.
Then I talk about emotional clutter, and that usually stems from guilt or fear. So emotional clutter can be, this cost a lot of money, my kid made this to me, so-and-so gave this to me, that what if I need it, that fear. So emotional clutter really then starts to get in the way and bottlenecks you from making action because you have all these other like emotional, like tug of war going on
Mm-hmm.
that gets you into that state of like indecision. I don't know what to do. And then the third type is what I call calendar clutter. And calendar clutter comes from either not using your time wisely, so not having good productivity, time management type skills, or just plain old being overscheduled, having more hours in the day. I mean, more things to do than there are hours in the day.
Mm-hmm.
And so those are the three main buckets. Now, there's other types of clutter that I talk about on, in life, financial clutter, digital clutter, all of those other kind of offshoots of that. But really when I work with people, when I talk with people, there's usually one of those three that stands out to them.
Yeah.
And the thing, I don't know if it's the beauty or just the reality of it is they're all intertwined. If one leads to another. They're not siloed. And so, but being able to name it and identify it gives you a starting ground of how to address it.
Yeah. It's so powerful when you can really put some language around it and
Totally.
understand where to start maybe and navigate through it. 'Cause it can feel really overwhelming if you don't know exactly, if you don't know what to call it or what to label it. I think that can be really difficult to start to move forward. So there's 9 types. Can you give a sentence or
Sure.
two of what each 9 are?
Yeah. I'll walk through. I'll give, again, very top line overview of everything. And then again, I'm sure you'll link up to it. I've got a bunch of resources and stuff on the website so that you can get a little bit more meat and potatoes if you're interested.
Yeah.
So the first type is called the perfectionist or the improver. And they are somebody who, again, they like to dot their I's and cross their T's. And when it comes to clutter and organization, through kind of looking at it from that perspective, your ones are going to probably be the types that on the surface are going to be very organized. Where their pitfalls are, where their downfall can be, is that they can oftentimes be controlling because they want it done right. And I'm air quoting for anybody watching this. They want it done right. And so they will almost, they struggle with delegation because they're like, I can just do it faster. I can do it better. I'm just going to do it. And so that relinquishing of control is really a lot where the ones have to work on. And they also will often revise and revise and revise. And so they spend a lot of time on things other than just like, let's just get it and put it out in the world and move on.
Mm-hmm.
So again, there's good and bad in both. There's no better type or worse type. They're all amazing. They all have amazing qualities and they all have areas where they can improve on. And the framework that I've developed speaks to strategies for each of those types based on kind of where their natural superpowers are. So those are the ones. The 2s are known as the helper. And again, who doesn't want to be a helper? And the helpers are what you would think of as they're the people that are like, oh, I need to give my I'm going to carpool. I'm going to give my kid the ride and I'm going to do this. And they're the first person that you call to like make a meal and all of that kind of stereotypical helping type of a mindset. Where they struggle is putting themselves last. They are putting their own needs last. They are putting everybody else's oxygen mask on first. And so as a byproduct, clutter, either physical clutter or calendar clutter, can easily accumulate because they're so busy serving other people that they struggle oftentimes with boundaries because they feel like their worth is based on how they serve other people. So saying no is really, really challenging for a 2 because they take it very personally. Like I would be hurting and letting someone down. So that's like an area that 2s really need to struggle on. 3s are known as the achiever, and the 3s are very like leadership oriented, a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of CEOs. They're very smart and quick processors, which is great. A lot of threes, and I've done, again, I don't have scientific data, like clinical data, but I've done a lot of focus groups. I've interviewed a lot of all different Enneagram types. And the majority of threes that I've spoken to actually have, and my husband's a three. And I suspect you are too, even though I think you say otherwise, but I have my thought. You're not supposed to type other people, but whatever. Threes have a visceral reaction to clutter. Like it actually causes them. I had one friend on one of my podcasts who's a three say, when I walk into a room that is filled with physical clutter or surrounded, I actually can feel like it's nails on a chalkboard. Like that is like I feel like my pricklies come up in my body.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that threes need to work on is being cognizant that not everybody has that same reaction to them, and communicating to slow down, because they are very quick and they can tend to like just put stuff away mindlessly to get it away, but not always systematically. And I think communication and to slow down and really articulate it is the work that a three needs to do. And maybe I'm talking about my husband. So maybe I'm thinking about Josh as I'm saying this, but no, I think that is really the big thing, is really being able to understand that, okay, I can have this, but I don't have to do it all. And threes are quick. They're do it. So, and not everybody works at their speed. So things to think about.
Yeah. You might've just defined me completely.
The fours are known as the individualist, and my one daughter is a four. And so fours are very feeling dominant. They are what you would think of the stereotypical creative artist. Again, not everybody, I'm totally stereotyping, but if you are trying to conjure up an image in your mind, you're thinking about the person that's got a lot of, like, they think in texture, that's the thing. And so I have found that a lot of fours will struggle with emotional clutter because everything is very rich and thick. And it doesn't mean that you can't be organized, but I think you really have to be very intentional about putting boundaries in. Fours also struggle. Their least access center is the doing center. So they feel and they think and they feel and they think, but the execution doesn't always happen. So they have to be really, really intentional. But I have interviewed fours and I've talked to fours who really are very organized. And the difference is they've just had to work a little bit harder. They've had to figure out what those strategies are for them. So it's not like if you're like, oh crap, I'm a four, I'm destined to be disorganized. That is not the case. Right. It just means that you might have to like give yourself a little bit of a longer runway than somebody else. The fives are the observer, and they are, or the investigator, and they're very headspace driven. They like data, they like analysis. So they like to have all of the facts. And so again, they struggle with execution for different reasons than a four does. Fours like feeling, going down memory lane, all of the things, where a five is trying to research. So in the world of organization, they're going to be like, I'm going to research the best system for my garage. And they're going to spend hours on researching it and think that that's actually doing the work, but it's not. And so fives have to get out of their head and into the action more. And that's where fives struggle. But they are, again, but they're very data driven and smart when it comes to that kind of stuff. Sixes are the loyalists, and their unconscious motivation has to do with fear. And so that whole emotional what if, they're your worst case scenario thinkers. So the sixes are, again, stereotyping. The apocalypse is coming. The pandemic is coming. They are like, we're going to prepare for everything in their worst case scenario. And so again, I think the biggest thing for sixes is that reassurance and permission. Where I see them struggle with emotional clutter is less about the sentimental part of it, like, oh, this means so much to me, but more the like, what if I get rid of it and I need it? So it's that reassurance that it's okay, and kind of walking through those strategies, which again, I talk about in detail, of like how often, what's the reality that you would need it? How much would it cost you if you had to replace it? Like going through all of these, like, let's play this scenario through to the end, because the sixes don't always trust themselves. So they use the stuff as a safety net in place of trusting themselves. The sevens are the enthusiasts, and the sevens are fun. The sevens are the like glass half playful people. They love to try new things. They're very forward thinking. They're all about action. And so the Monday, like organization is routine. It's repetitive. And for sevens, that's like, wah, 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 because who wants that? I'd rather be outside doing something. And so when you talk about trying to find that time management, and again, I don't want to use that word balance, but how am I building margin into my day so that I can do these mundane things and still have the fun? How can I figure that out? That's often a struggle for sevens because they'd rather be out there doing the thing. And so they're always planning the next thing. Eights, this is myself. We're known as the challenger. And I also just heard on a podcast, someone calls the protector. And I like that because it sounds much nicer. Now you said that you thought you were an 8. And I said, I don't think you are. 8s and 3s on the surface look a lot alike because we are both we both are very process driven. Like we are both fast process, like we're both leaders, we both make decisions, we're not afraid to take risks. So on the surface, we look very, very similar. The difference has to do with our unconscious motivation, where the 8s are very driven by justice. We are like, it's all about the championing of the underdog, and 3s are, and I don't want it to, and a lot of times when I explain it, people think it sounds shallow, and it's not, but it's more like my worth is determined by my work. Like that's like, I'm here to do a good job, and that gets interchanged. And it's a nuance, but if you start to like, if you're thinking about, I could be one or the other, I'd encourage you to read up on both of them to see which one really resonates with you. Because again, there's a lot of similarities in how we navigate things. We're quick processors and we do things. So again, I think I said I struggle with calendar clutter because I have a tendency to just take things over because I know I can do it quicker. I can do it faster. I can do, and so I'll do that, which is also very 1-ish, but 1s, their goal is to improve it. And my goal is to get it done. And so it's a little bit of a different, again, we're talking nuances, but that's why it's so important to really read behind the action. And I think the biggest wake up call for 8s is realizing how you come across to other people, because we are big in the room people. We're very big in the room. And we don't always mean to be. And that can be misconstrued to the outside as abrasive, bullying, the B word often. And so it's just trying to realize that we're passionate about the things that we're passionate about. That doesn't mean that we're trying to bulldoze you, but that can be very subtle. And then finally, the 9s, which are the peacemakers or the peacekeepers, really. My other daughter's a 9, and their unconscious motivation is really to avoid conflict. They are the opposite. Where conflict, I don't see conflict as a bad thing. It's like, oh, let's have a meeting of the minds. You have one thing and you have one opinion, I have another. Let's talk about it. Let's flush it out. 9s a lot of times they'll see conversation as conflict. And I'm like, that's not the case. And so, especially when it comes to clutter, 9s don't want to rock the boat. They're what we call mergers. They'll go with the flow. Doesn't mean they don't have an opinion. It just means they'd rather not fight the fight. But I do find that because a lot of times 9s on the surface are very chill people, like they don't seem to be like tightly wound and high strung. They often tend to be what I call clutter blind. Now, that's not, again, all 9s, but they're the people that are like, don't sweat the small stuff. Like, who cares if the dishes are out? Where a 3 would be like, we're not moving a step forward until those dishes are done. And so again, it's, why are you sweating that? It's just the perception of, in the grand scheme of things, why is it such a big deal? And that's why I think that language is so important, because again, it's not about the dish. It's about, I can't rest. I can't relax. I want to spend time with you, but until this is done, this is how this makes me feel. And make it about yourself, and communicating that. And that's when it comes, when you use these languages with your spouse specifically, but also with your kids, when you communicate that and it's still not done, now you're talking about a relational issue versus the clutter issue.
Do you change over time with your type? So if I tested my 8-year-old, would he find the same information when he's 38?
Such a great question. So, and there's a lot of data about you really shouldn't type children. I mean, I think it's hard not to. When you can't unknow something, and you'll see certain behaviors. But no, the short answer is no, you don't change your type. But what you do is you can move throughout your type from like an unhealthy to a healthy version. So the goal is once you know this information about yourself, it's really more than like, it's a fun party trick. Oh, you're an Enneagram this, I'm an Enneagram that. That's great. But it's really, I always say, what do you do with that information? How do you use that to say, how can I be the best version of myself? Whether it's relationally, whether it's at work. And again, specifically in the work that I'm doing, how does that tie into my life in clutter and organization? How do I handle stressful situations when it comes to that? Because clutter can be very triggering for people. And so, as we know what our where our natural downfalls are, where our natural strengths are, we could start to lean in. And again, without getting too geeky, sciencey, there's all these connection points to the different types on the Enneagram. So we can like lean in on the other parts of us, even though we have one dominant one. So it's like, okay, I'm an 8. So the numbers upward you on either side are your what's called wings. So I'll like lean into my 9 wing, and I like, instead of being my 8 challenger and wanting to be combative, I'll go, you know what? Let me like lean into my 9-ness a little bit. Let me just like, is this really worth it? So now that you have this context, it gives you an opportunity to again say, okay, I'm starting to feel myself, my anxiety take off. I'm starting to see this. Or on the other hand, I'm starting to feel a little like slothy and lazy. How can I like start to channel this and say, okay, I'm going to start to really be a little bit more productive now. So it can work both ways.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, these constant conversations in my house. My husband is one of those people who will save every little screw and washer, and he's got like a whole jar in the garage of extra parts, and I tease him all the time, like, throw it away. The screw, like nothing. It's taking up space in my house. It's making me crazy. Every time I walk through the garage, it bugs me. And he's like, I will need it someday. I will strangle you. And then every once in a while, he needs it, and he makes sure to rub it in my face that he had when he needed to get it done. So this is really helpful because it definitely gives us some talking points. And you're right. I think from your description, I'm definitely a 3, and 8 didn't resonate with me much. Some, because I definitely can.
Which makes total sense because again, there's a lot of similarities.
Yeah. But I'm interested to go back and read. And you're right. I took a test one time in a specific circumstance. Maybe that was just how I was feeling that day in that moment. So it'll be interesting to do some more reading on that. That's awesome. You are a wealth of knowledge. I really appreciate you coming on. Can you share with the audience how to find you, how to connect, continue the conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. So the best place to connect up with me is my website's the hub for everything, which is simply the letter B, like boy, organized.com. And again, we're Simply Be Organized on all the socials. My podcast, obviously you're listening to this. If you're a podcast listener, This Organized Life podcast. And on my website, there's again, tons of free resources. We have a whole Enneagram and Clutter framework. If anyone's interested, there's some free downloads to kind of get you the introduction. But if you want to dive a little bit deeper, I'll offer you guys a promo code for sure, for whatever you want. I think we could just do code. What do you want it to be?
EB is great.
EB20. How about that? EB20, 20% off. Won't put an end date on it because I know people listen to podcasts in all kinds of crazy times, not necessarily in real time. So EB20 on any of our Enneagram and Clutter stuff. And, feel free to reach out. I love talking about this stuff.
Awesome. So good. Thank you, Laurie, for coming on. And thank you for listening today. I'm so glad you came by the Beehive. If you haven't already subscribed, please make sure you do so that you don't miss one. Until then, see you later. Bye.
Well, that wraps it up. Thank you so much for listening. If you're new around here, please be sure to leave us a review on any podcast platform you're listening to. And you can always reach out to me to let me know what topics you're interested in hearing about, or maybe telling me someone you think would be great for the show. Either way, I'd love to hear from you. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram at EfficiencyBee. Until next time, see ya.